Welcome to the Midlife Fulfilled podcast. Are you over 40 and ready to truly thrive? Well, on this podcast, we go deep on ways to thrive across the 5 pillars of midlife: health, fitness, career, relationships, and legacy. I'm Bernie Borges, midlife advocate, life coach, and your host. Subscribe now and get ready to thrive. Sean Ilenrey, welcome to the Midlife Fulfilled podcast, a maximum episode.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here, and I love what you're doing with the platform.
Well, thank you, Sean. I appreciate that. I am looking forward to our conversation. Let me give my listener a little bit of an introduction. You have quite a background, Sean. It's very different than all the backgrounds that I've had the privilege of featuring before. You were a high school dropout and you were homeless. Yeah. And today you're an award-winning executive in tech and you're a keynote speaker. And basically by turning your life around, that inspired you to help other professionals achieve their own personal success according to their definition of success. I love that about the way you think. Today, you're the CEO and founder of a company called Value Centric. You're also the author of the groundbreaking book, You Don't Owe Happiness. I'm sure we'll hear something about that. I know the book teaches 6 key principles of which you call value-centric leadership. And that's where you believe that when a team feels valued and valuable, they are optimally satisfied and they feel achieved. And just a big amen to that. And then through your company, Value Centric, you are driving towards a very ambitious mission of creating 100 million jobs in Africa by the year 2050. And when I saw that, Sean, I had to get you on the podcast and invite you to talk about that, because I know among my 5 pillars that this is really your legacy building, right? So let's get into it. You want to build your legacy by bringing 100 million jobs to Africa. Let's start with the why, and then we'll get into the how.
Oh, yes. So thank you. I think there's 2 different answers when it comes to why. There's the personal, but there's also the global mission. And personally, both of my parents are from Nigeria, and they met here in the US, and I was born here, and I didn't have the opportunity to really go back home until really the last couple of years, where I've gone back and I've experienced it. But I've always said that I want to be able to go back to the continent and be able to provide opportunities to others there, because I know what a job can do or a career could do to unlock a market and also unlock an individual's ability to take care of their family. So I've been thinking about this since about 2010, 2012, because I worked in the outsourcing industry for 11 years. And I saw what we did there. I saw that we could go into Latin America, Southeast Asia, India, and be able to bring opportunities that were global, whether the jobs came from the UK, Europe, or the US. And we were able to put that in a market where when we would hire one person, we would actually impact 10 families. And that to me sparked a desire to say, one day when I'm maybe 30, 40 years from now, when I'm later in life, when I'm retired, I'm going to go and do the same thing. And then I had an opportunity to be invited to go to Africa towards the end of 2023 to go for the Global Employment Challenge. And I visited Kenya and South Africa and immediately knew I don't have to wait until I'm in my 60s or 70s to do this. I can make an impact right now. So my personal mission is I want to be able to do what my parents didn't have the opportunity to do before they passed away and go home and create opportunities. But then there's also a global mission. The global reality is that Africa is the youngest continent on the planet with an average age of 19 years old. For context, the US and China are about an average of 38 years old. So when we look at 2050, we're going to be in a position where over 40% of the youth across the world are in Africa. And that puts us in a position where if our primary labor force is in Africa, yet we don't have the jobs, it's going to create not only turmoil for the nations there, but it also will negatively impact the rest of the world as well, because we'll need to make sure that if we want to see a thriving global economy, we want to make sure we have strong industries everywhere, not just in one segment of the planet.
Okay, that is very well thought out. Not surprising at all. Before we get into the how, I want to know, in terms of the types of jobs, I'm going to oversimplify and just say there's 2 types of jobs. There's knowledge worker jobs and sort of manual labor. right?
Yeah.
So how is that factoring into your planning? Is it both that you want to create, or is it one more than the other?
Yeah, so one more than the other, and it's primarily knowledge-based jobs. And but there's three tiers to that. When you have a knowledge-based opportunity where you essentially get paid for what you know versus what you do, there's going to be that entry level, which let's say that's going to be 70% of the jobs that come. Those are going to be those frontline opportunities, whether it's contact center work, back office work, data analysis, etc. But it's really that entry level to be able to get you started in your career. From there, we're going to have the next tier of intermediate jobs where you have the analysts that are brought out of those roles. You have more specialized skill sets, forecasters, planners, maybe even accountants. And then you have that higher upper echelon, that elite level of job where you're going to have those front end, back end engineers, those database administrators, et cetera, where they're going to have a much heavier skill set. And we understand that you have to bring those frontline jobs first, because then once you bring those roles, you're going to need the support staff. You're going to need the finance team to be able to support them. You're going to need leaders in place, multi-levels of leaders in place. And then by having a high abundance of those frontline jobs, you now improve the economy of that community. And then that community can then say, we have entrepreneurs. Let me raise my hand up. I can start a business, and the community can afford to buy my product because there's an abundance of jobs here. So we really look at it from that standpoint, not necessarily manufacturing, but how do we bring a lot of those knowledge-led roles to Africa?
Okay, so knowledge workers. And so I've got to ask, what do you see as the role of AI as it relates to the youth? You know, you mentioned that it's the youngest continent in the world. When you first said that, I didn't know what you meant until you clarified what you meant by that. And as you know, AI is just exploding on a daily basis. It's advancing. So everyone knows that it is having and will continue to have an impact on just jobs in general globally. So do you see any specific way that it can have an impact in that community in terms of the job market?
Absolutely. When I started this journey, it's funny that there were two things that I said were going to be the primary driver of where my industry, which was customer experience at the time, is going. AI in Africa. Reason being that they're both frontiers that are growing rapidly, and we're just now tapping into. When I look at AI, we do have, for example, there's certain roles where in Kenya, they have companies who are bringing these AI products there, but they still need workers to be on the back end to challenge and audit and see whether or not the AI is even accurate. So even though AI is prevalent, it still needs human intervention and human information to know what's going on. And the best way I heard it described was that we're heading to the future where it's not necessarily about what you know, but it's going to be about the wisdom you have. And essentially what that means is that it's not that I have the answer, it's that I know what question to ask AI in order to get a better answer. So in addition, what we're starting to see is that even as AI becomes more prevalent, it's taking away a lot of the mundane, easy work. But that complex work is still going to have to go to the human workforce. And we still have customers who want that human touch. So the opportunity that we're seeing is that as AI allows us to scale more businesses faster, they are going to need an expanded workforce, and they're able to do that by expanding to other regions like Africa.
Hey, it's Bernie, and I'm jumping into the middle of this episode with a quick message. I just want to share something that I'm really excited about. You know, if you're feeling like you're at a crossroads, whether it's in your career or leadership or just personal fulfillment, I want you to know that you are not alone. That is exactly why I'm now offering one-on-one executive coaching to help professionals like you gain clarity, take control, and just move forward with confidence. You see, I've been coaching people for a while now, and someone recently challenged me with this question. They said, Bernie, why aren't you availing yourself to others as an executive coach so that you can help them like you've helped me? You know, that really made me think. The truth is, I hadn't looked at it that way before. But after reflecting on it quite a bit, I decided that it was time to make this official. So if you're navigating a career transition, or you're just looking to level up in leadership, or just need a thought partner to help you figure out what's next, let's talk. I offer 3 coaching programs, and right now I have a limited enough free 30-minute discovery calls available to see if coaching is the right fit for you. No pressure, I promise. Just an honest conversation about where you are and where you want to go. Hey, if this resonates, book your free discovery call. Just visit the link in the show notes or head to the executive coaching page at midlifefulfilled.com. And now let's get back to the episode. Okay, so let's get into the how, because, personally, I've got a mission as well. I want to reach 3 billion people across the planet. And what's meaningful about that number, Sean, is that it's estimated that there's about 3 billion people over the age of 40 in the world. And so I want to reach everybody over the age of 40 with my platform, right? Seek fulfillment across the 5 pillars: health, fitness, career, relationships, and legacy. So the way that I'm planning to do that is through leaders who lead people. So I know you've got a plan, right? How are you going to create 100 million jobs in Africa by 2050?
Yes. And I want to give some context. So 100 million sounds very ambitious. The one thing we're doing is we're not doing it alone. These are going to be through partnerships and ensuring that the awareness is there and the structure is in place. But that 100 million is very small in the sense of by 2050, there's going to be an additional 1.1 billion people living in Africa in comparison to where we are today. Their workforce alone will be 1.4 billion people. So that 100 million is barely even 10% of what we're looking at. So there's still a much greater need. There's going to need to be more companies helping with this outside of just myself. But the way we do it is we believe in that we approach it in a model that we call from soil to seed to plant. And what that means is that we look at the government like soil. If you are trying to plant crops in a place where there's bad soil, you will yield a few plants, but not a lot, because the environment is not conducive for it to grow. So we want to make sure the soil is right. So by partnering with governments and strategic partnerships and setting up better regulations, better incentives, better structures and infrastructure for entrepreneurs to come in and now create businesses, it'll do better. When we think of seed, those are our entrepreneurs. We're working with a lot of early stage startups in Africa, really right now in Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Kenya, and South Africa, and really helping them understand how do you actually compete on the global market? How do you set yourself up for funding? And how do you make sure you have a product that can actually impact the world? Because we believe with the seed, it'll spark, of course, the community. Then from there, we have the plant. The plant, that's your plants are your established corporations. What we do there is we look at workforce development and leadership development. And we say, great, you have a strong company in play, but learning is what happens every single day. It's not a one-time thing. So what can we do to go into these organizations and teach them the best practices we know and help them bring the best out of their teams? So really, as I mentioned, it's about soil to seed to plant, and we're hoping that we can create a forest across the continent.
So it sounds like you've really thought through the infrastructure. What about the educational infrastructure? You mentioned that there's going to be an additional 1.2 billion people on the continent, I think by that time, right? 2050. Is the educational infrastructure in place, both the elementary as well as higher ed on the continent?
So there's opportunities in both areas. I think that the good thing is that we're approaching it from, we're feeling better about education. We're seeing education improve across the continent. We're seeing better data and internet speeds. So now they're able to actually do a lot more online learning as well. So the information is there. The disconnect we've seen is that going from receiving your education in school versus being able to apply that to the workforce, there's still a gap. So what we've been heavily focusing on is that workforce development training on the in-between. For example, in Nigeria, my strategic partner, we have an initiative going on where she's owning the workforce development side. And we have almost 1,000 centers across the nation that we believe that we can add workforce development classrooms. And what's going to happen is that these are going to be students who have already graduated college, but now they're going to come into these environments and learn what are the additional things you need to know in order to be successful in a corporate environment. If you're doing work that's international, how do you make sure you understand their cultures, you understand their working habits, and the disciplines you need to be able to have in place? So I believe, to your point, we still have to focus on the education and continue to develop that from a primary and secondary school. But then also when they do graduate, there still needs to be that hand holding to help them get to the next level.
Okay. Now, Sean, I know that you're located here in the U.S. And obviously, this initiative is on the continent of Africa. From a partner standpoint, are you working with people globally? I mean, to what extent do you have collaboration with partners here in the US or maybe in other parts of the world that are not necessarily on the ground in Africa?
Yes. So right now we do have partners here in the US. We also have partners in Australia. We have partners in Europe as well. And of course, across Africa with the primary countries right now, we have a relationship in Ghana that we just launched. The key thing is making sure that if we're approaching the businesses and we're telling them, you have a great product, you have a great culture, you have a great standard of quality, we want you to be able to do business here in Africa. What's holding you back? And that's a conversation that doesn't just happen with, let's say, the big brands and the big corporation. That conversation also has to happen with the outsourcers, who are those third parties in between, who tend to bring those jobs there. So we need to make sure that the environment is conducive for both of those, for both outsourcers and the actual clients. Now, in having those conversations, what we're doing is a survey to get their feedback, because we want to be able to take that information and have conversations with the government officials and have honest conversations and say, these are the top things that are holding them from doing business in your nation. This is why South Africa is succeeding in this sector, but you're still further behind, even though you have the stronger population economy.
Okay. So let's look into the crystal ball, Sean. And I want to ask you, if you could think through reasons that you could reach that goal of 100 million before 2050, what might they be? And then conversely, let's fast forward to 2050 and say you don't reach the goal of 100 million. What might those reasons be? So one being you get there sooner, right? The other being you don't get there by the 2050 goal.
Yeah, I love that question. I believe, getting there sooner, a big reason for why we want to do that is right now we still have very high unemployment rates across the continent. I believe Nigeria is still sitting at about 40% unemployment. And a lot of the unemployment that we're seeing is coming from college graduates. When I was in Kenya, we saw the same thing where we had, thousands of students who they did the right thing. They went through school, they got their degree, but when it was time to actually have a job, it wasn't there for them. What we've also noticed is that when it comes to unemployment, women are primarily negatively impacted, specifically Black women. Of course, in a lot of these nations, we have multi-ethnic, but we're seeing a big segment of Black women fall further behind, where they're 2 to 3x the unemployment rate of the entire nation. So by being able to come into these places and provide these opportunities earlier, we can close that gap and start solving problems today. The problem needs to be solved today, but we want to be realistic about what we can do. But it's not really a 2050 problem. It is a 2025 problem. If it takes longer to solve, I think what can hold us back the longest, if I'm being completely honest, would be our ability to partner with the soil of the government regulations. How do we partner with our governments to be able to set up an environment where the infrastructure is where it needs to be? We know that power can be a problem in a lot of African nations where you don't know if your power is going to be on or not tomorrow. And for a business, that's something that you just can't deal with. So we want to make sure that we have the right generators in place and partner with those companies and be able to have a list of approved vendors who can go in and say, we're supplying power to your specific building in case anything happens. The same thing with data and internet speeds. They have to be up to par. But the other thing that we have to think about is just bias, where a lot of times in the media and the reports that we get, they're not always the most positive about these African nations. So how do we start telling a better story and saying, this is actually what's going on. Here's what the community looks like, and here's how you can do business there successfully. I think if we miss our target, we'll still get to a place we've learned so much. We've also made a big enough impact to be ready for the next 50 years. But it's something that we have to move towards, because if we don't, we will, like, as I mentioned earlier, be facing a global crisis.
And I don't have to tell you, Sean, that, money talks and businesses, when something is beneficial to a business for business purposes, then, they get involved, right? Then
Yes.
they have a reason, they're motivated. So how do you motivate businesses to participate in this movement?
Yeah, there's several factors. The one thing I'll hone in on, because of course you're going to see that price compression where the cost of labor is much more affordable. But to me, the biggest driver and what opened my eyes was that the talent is there. Some of the best engineers that I've ever met, the best web designers, even just best from a customer service standpoint, even accounting. The talent is so abundant, it's so concentrated that if I'm a business owner and I'm saying I'm in the market to outsource, I'm not encouraging business owners to outsource if they don't have to, or if it's not a part of their strategy. But if you're already planning to outsource or already outsourcing, Africa is going to be a wealth of information, knowledge, and success for you because the talent is there in abundance. So I think that businesses not only will see the financial benefit, but they'll also be able to have the talent. Then also they get the diversity, not necessarily of ethnic background, but the diversity of information to understand, okay, if this market performs this way, can I replicate that in a different market? And I've seen that a lot throughout my career where, let's say I have my team in Mexico and I have my team in the Philippines and I have my team in Iowa. And there's something my team in the Philippines is doing that we wouldn't have thought of, but because they're in a different environment and they have a different approach culturally, it's successful where they are. And now we can replicate that across the entire business and we can make the entire business better. So I think from a business standpoint, you are going to see the financial benefits. You are going to increase your talent pool. But in addition, you're going to be able to get insights and innovations of things that you didn't think about before.
What about philanthropic organizations? The Bill Gates Foundation comes to mind. Whether or not that specifically that organization is involved, are organizations like that involved?
Absolutely. One of the ones that I'm partnering with, which is, like I mentioned before, the Global Employment Challenge, that's exactly what they're doing. I believe they've received funding from the Mandela Foundation as well, where there is an effort from the nonprofit sector as well on how do we bring these opportunities to the nations that are there on the continent. But the key is they need to make sure that we have the right partnerships across the pond. They can't do it alone. And that's the reason why I was initially pulled into it, and it opened my eyes. But there's a lot of work to be done. And I think that even when I look at what the US is doing now from a policy standpoint in Africa and the World Bank is doing, there's a lot of funding being allocated to solve this problem. Where we see the challenge happen is that there's not a lot of work to operationalize it. So the funding is actually being put out there, but who's actually going to take the expertise and actually build the proper infrastructure and pipeline to make this work?
Sean, I want to shift gears a little bit here, and I want to get personal. Talk to me about the impact of your legacy, and share with me, if you will, conversations that you've had with your kids about this. Right. So I know you're a dad. I don't know how old your kids are, but have you had conversations with them about this whole initiative, this whole mission you're on?
Yes, my kids, I have 3 boys. My oldest one is 16, my youngest one is 5. So my house is busy. They've witnessed me go, and they're excited whenever I go and always asking, how was it? I think for my boys, it's provided a lot of perspective, because even on our worst day, it's better than a lot of the days that we experienced there in Nigeria. And when I was there recently, I went there for the Global Entrepreneurship Festival. And on the way there, we decided to charter. So we had a giant bus, a couple of vans and trucks, and we're all chartering. And halfway on our 5-hour journey from city to city, our bus breaks down in the middle of nowhere near, a local town where there was a lot of poverty. And, watching these young kids who should probably be in school right now, essentially selling snacks on the side of the road to make a living, it just opens your mind and heart to say, that's my son, that's my daughter. I can see there was a young man there where I could just see he could do so much more in life, but given his circumstances and lack of opportunity, he was put in a position where survival came first. And so to give my boys that context and let them see those pictures and kind of see this is what the real world looks like. And no matter how comfortable we get, we can't forget that there's somebody else out there that we can positively make an impact on. And at the same time, it could have easily been us. Where we were born, it was chance. And I'm a person who I love the US. I love America. I still believe we're the nation of opportunity. So to be able to share a little bit of that with someone else on the other side of the planet, I think it's important for my boys to know that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Have they made a trip with you?
Not yet. They keep asking me. So I will bring them on my 3rd trip to Nigeria. I just went to Nigeria recently. I'm going to go back again. Then I'll go with my wife, and then I will bring the kids. So I want to make sure I know exactly what I'm doing and where I'm going.
Yeah, yeah. I remember both of my kids, not together at different ages. They were both probably in the same age range. Let's call it around age 16 when each of them was at that age, because they're 5 years apart, and they're now 34 and 29. But when they were around 16, they did a mission trip through our church to Kenya,
Wow.
and they came back and said it was life changing
Yeah.
because of the stories you've just shared, where they witnessed kids living in very different conditions,
Yeah.
yet being happy and joyful and enjoying life. And they said it was just, life changing for them. So I'm
Absolutely.
sure your kids will have the same experience.
I hope so.
So this is your legacy. And I love something you said at the very beginning of our conversation, Sean, and that is that, you realize that you don't have to wait until you're 60 or whatever, 30 years from now or X number of years from now to do this, that you could do this now. And you're taking the action to do it. And I'm so impressed by that. And I'm just so moved by it. And just really want to thank you for what you're doing, because you are making a mark. You're having an impact. So why don't you share with us, how can people just connect with you and learn more about everything you've got going on in your world?
Absolutely. And thank you again. To your point, this was something that it scares me, and that's why I know I should do it. The thing I'm the most afraid of means the thing I need to tackle, because it's way bigger than me. And because it's so much bigger than my capabilities alone, it requires me to become a better partner, a better collaborator. So I'm enjoying the process of even opening up and understanding that I'm not going to be the smartest person in the room by far. But as long as I put in enough effort, we can make sure the smart people are on the job. But of course, you can find me at value-centric.net to learn more about our organization and what we're doing. You can also find me, Sean Ilenrey, on LinkedIn. And if you're on Instagram, I'm actually taking it seriously now because I never did. You can find me at Sean, SEAN, the speaker. But of course, I'd love to stay connected with you.
Fantastic. Well, all that will be linked up in the show notes. And I just want to add that my sense is that you feel called to do this, whether you acknowledge the calling from God or the universe or whatever source you attribute it to. It's clear to me that you feel called to do this and you're answering the call. And I just can't say enough how wonderful that is. It's inspiring to me, and it's a valuable lesson to me as well. And I'm sure to the listener as well. And that is when we feel called to do something to really leave our mark in the world, we need to take some action. So I thank you for what you're doing. And I thank you for sharing it here today on this maximum episode of the Midlife Fulfilled podcast.
Thank you so much.